The effect that fracking would have. As far as I'm aware, nothing. Absolutely nothing. The question around fracking is you can induce earthquakes by fracking. What you do is you pump up the fluid pressure in order to crack the rocks, and that can stimulate small earthquakes. And that then allows the fluid to flow so that you have, for example, deep hot rocks in Australia they're using for green technology for extracting electricity. That's the idea of it, or you might do it for extracting oil is another way. In New Zealand, we don't have any particular fracking going on anywhere near the Alpine Fault, but we did have the drilling project, which we did 2 years ago, and we were frightened of the possibility of what would happen if the Alpine Fault went off while we were doing that. And in my lifespan, there's a pretty good chance in my career that it's going to go off while I'm a scientist, and I'm going to get the blame. People are going to come along and say, you guys drilled the Alpine Fault, what did you do? The thing is, we had a complete safety panel review, international. We brought in 12 international experts to look at what we were doing to make sure that we couldn't set off the Alpine Fault, and they all agreed that we couldn't. There are a lot of questions, though, around if you have an earthquake, how does that then give stress to the Alpine Fault and what effects will that have? And so we're doing things like measuring the effect of the tidal, the earth tidal responses, and we're finding, really interestingly, when you do a big rainfall load, and those big rainfalls, that actually cranks up the fluid pressure on the Alpine Fault, and it might be the trigger. But having said that, tidal responses, things like we heard from Ken Ring, they are about, the fluctuations associated with those sorts of things are about 0.5 megapascals. When you change at absolute most, when you change the stress regime with an earthquake, you're talking about thousands of times. So you'd have to be right on the cusp of ready to go for something like that to trigger an event, and really it's very unlikely.
Since January, we've been looking at the whole issue of fees. And MPI brought in the border charge last year, which has brought in something like 60-70 million for MPI. I guess the issue for the government is so soon after building in a border tax for biosecurity is how we did that for conservation and local government. A group of Air New Zealand, the two big airports and THL have commissioned a study which is going to the Prime Minister very shortly on what's best practice. I personally favour the British Columbia system, which is a differential charge, and if you've got a Canadian driver's licence, you get a 70% discount. So this is our heritage, the route burn, but the route burn numbers are going from 50 to 60 to 70% international. Milford sold out. All of January sold out on Milford in the first 2 hours. So, but somewhere we've got to land this, how we clip the ticket more. And we're waiting for this report by Air New Zealand and a number of those agencies. We've done our own thinking. We've got to get better at making sure all our concessions fully comply. We know the number of landings, they are paying their way. We are clipping the ticket on all our camps. Part of our problem is, Eglinton Valley has gone from, in 2 years, has gone from 35,000 to 55,000 campers. It's the biggest campsite in New Zealand. But we've physically got to put a four-wheel drive there in the morning to clip the ticket, as you do at Mount Cook. If we don't have a ranger there, the money just walks out the door. So it's a... Well, I've just said that MPI's just brought in a border tax. The tourism industry was pretty upset about it. The cruise ships said they would stay away from New Zealand. So we've got to, the Prime Minister said in NBR that he favours the departure tax. So this is a political decision that we've got to work through. Most countries charge an entry fee for national parks. New Zealand's probably one of the few countries in the world that hasn't done that. It's part of our heritage. So it's a big political call to put a booth down the valley with $10 to come in here. These are political calls, not my call, and it'll be the government of the day that decides what they want to do. Well, Mike Slater and I were in Kelman Hut the other night with Rob Young, who built the foundations, and Rob knew where every rock had come from into the foundation. And we hadn't had the benefit of this, but we're sort of debating this as we're sleeping in Kelman, which way would the hut fall if we had a magnitude 8? And Rob said, well, we'll probably go down the Murchison head wall. And of course, Kelman Hut was built in 1988 because Tasman Saddle had become unstable. And so you sort of look around from Kelman and you think, where would be the next building platform? And there isn't one. So I think this is why we really value this conference, is where does New Zealand go? You know, if we're increasingly finding it hard to get hut sites, if Tasman becomes unstable and Kelman becomes unstable, these are calls that particularly Mike Slater has to make about what we do. And I think we're rapt to have you hear from Denali, because Denali in many ways is leading the world in how you relate people to the mountains and some of the symbols of the behaviour that the US Park Service run in Denali are really key learnings for us. But you know, I've just sat through a presentation where I've been told that Mueller is sitting on the top of a slip, and I'm in charge of a department that's putting 3,000 people a year up there. You know, got to think through these issues.